Chapter 12. Charles's face beamed when I accepted his marriage proposal, at the same time dismissing and ignoring Max's pleas. I smiled whenever Charles kissed me tenderly on my lips, feigning happiness like a stage actor. I got part of what I wanted, joint custody of my son. Max's hunched shoulders straightened when outside of court, in front of cameras, a reporter asked about the custody battle. He didn't acknowledge defeat. He gestured and said, "It's over. I'm going home to my son." But inside I knew that he had lost everything that he wanted. He hurried into his limo and drove away. Max had to bring Maxim to me in a month. The stipulation stated that Maxim could not be under Charles's roof unless we were married. That was Max's undoing. He bet wrong. He bet that I wouldn't marry Charles, and that my threats were empty. I turned over my bungalow to Crystal. Jonas had been in jail for 3 months, and still she continued to see Josh whenever he was in Seattle. I couldn't stand to see Crystal using Josh, and I couldn't face him. I disappeared into Charles's home, on a secluded island in the Caribbean Sea. Knowing that Max would do whatever it took to get Jonas free, and Joshua would be left out in the cold, I tried to distance myself from everyone. I agreed to be married at Charles's hideaway. It was an island with a large mansion perched high on a hill, surrounded by a small mountain range and beautiful white sandy beaches. The only transportation was a jet to the neighboring island, and a helicopter to Charles's estate. The waves woke me each morning as they beat against the rocks, drowning out the sound of Max's voice in my head and the dreams of him in my body. The sound of seagulls was a welcoming respite from the noise of the world and the awful news in the headlines. There was more going on in the world than my petty problems. Sitting up and looking out of the window, I heard a soft knock at the door. It was my breakfast tray. I hadn't felt like myself in months. I ate very little food and slept more. Charles arranged for a doctor to see me and give me an exam, but that would be later today. The maid tiptoed into the room. "Ms. Bishop, I have your breakfast and the newspaper." "Leave it on the table." "Thank you." It was hard having someone serve me, but I was getting used to it. I reached for the toast and my eyes glanced at the newspaper headlines. Jonas Blackstone released. Jessica Beaumont arrested in the necktie murder of San Francisco heiress. My breath caught, and I felt as if I was drowning, and I sat up straight. I couldn't open the paper fast enough to read it. The article noted that Detective Blake Scotto and Maximilian Blackstone had arranged the taping of Jessica Beaumont, where she confessed to Max that she had killed the heiress, whom she had been in a sexual relationship with, and that she would have killed Alexander Bishop if Max had attempted to marry her. That tape was inadmissible, but when interrogated by Blake and another detective, Jessica admitted that she and the heiress were indeed lovers, and that they were into erotic asphyxiation, and it was all a terrible accident. The article further noted that Jonas's DNA was on the tie he had taken from Max's closet, but because the DNA of identical twins is the same, there was no differentiating Max's DNA from Jonas's. The reporter continued that Jonas had masqueraded as Max. Jonas confessed to the crime to prevent Max from going to jail because he wanted to protect Max and his son Maxim. I felt faint, so I lay down, and when I woke it was 1 p.m. The nurse informed me that the doctor was waiting. I hurried into the shower and dressed, and met him in an office on the grounds of the estate. He asked me a series of questions concerning my health, and my mother's and father's health history. I informed him that I had been adopted, and had not looked for my birth parents. The nurse took samples of my blood to analyze. It was a doctor's office with a lab. That's how billionaires roll, I thought. They had everything at their convenience. I was so caught up on not accepting a handout from Max that I missed something very important. He had money and things to give to me, only more than if I had fallen in love with a poor man. I happened to have fallen in love with a billionaire. Blake was willing to spend his month's pay on taking me to dinner and a good bottle of wine. Only Max and Charles had much more, and they wanted to do the same. I accepted it from Charles because Max made me angry. I was an ass of the highest form. The doctor came back with the results of the test. You are a healthy 23-year-old. And it is not unusual for you to be pregnant and still have a false menstrual cycle. No. Pregnant? How? When? My mind revolved around the room, searching for the time it had occurred, and stopped on the day Max came to my house. It was not supposed to end with me having sex with him. Hell, it was not supposed to begin with him between my legs. I was celibate then, no men, and especially not Max. Too much had been happening, and I had forgotten to refill my prescription of birth control pills. I didn't have time to see my gynecologist and my dentist, forget it. I hadn't seen him in 6 months, and with the coffee stains I looked a mess. I had finally gotten around to the dentist, and now my smile was radiant for my wedding day. Thank goodness for youth. Youth could mask most things in life. When you have ordinary looks, you are as beautiful as a fresh flower to men of 30, and in Charles's case, 35. I had to tell Charles about my pregnancy. I couldn't keep that from him. But what was I going to do about Max? Would he believe that the child was his, or would I now have to prove that I had never had another man in my body but him? As horrible as I had been to Max, I wouldn't have blamed him if he walked away from me. And Charles, what am first to say to him? I knew that if Max pissed me off, I would marry Charles out of spite. This whole situation was making me crazy, or was it my hormones driving me crazy and interfering with my thinking? I left the doctor's office and walked from his cottage to the mansion, taking time to look at the beautiful flowers and inhale the wonderful scents. Reaching the side door, I entered and headed for the library. When Charles wasn't working in his office, first was sure to find him buried in a book. I quietly opened the door. He turned around. Oh, it's you, Alex. He stood, laying the book and his glasses on the table. I turned in a circle to marvel at the vast number of books in his possession. His eyes followed my expression. I can't bring myself to part with anything. I guess when I love something, I hoard it. Well, that explained everything. He kept pictures of his wife and her clothes all through the house. He even had her room exactly as she had left it. And my surreal resemblance to her was shocking. I saw myself at 35. Looking up at her portrait, I said, "Charles, first have something to tell you." "What is it?" He walked around his chair to stand in front of me, reaching for my hands and holding them. His gaze and his voice took a sexual tone. "You look ravishing today. You have a beautiful bloom on your face, like a flower that's ready to be plucked." That is a word that I would never connect with this sedate and reserved man. Did I miss something? Did I overlook the sexual nature of this man? "You need to sit, Charles." "Only if you sit beside me," he said without expression, and he pointed to the place near him. I drew a deep breath and then exhaled. His eyes watched mine and then settled on my mouth. He had this strange look, I had seen on Max when Max's eyes landed on my mouth. Then he declared that he wanted to fuck it. Clearly Charles would never say that, but first knew what he was thinking. I'm pregnant. Marvelous. What do you mean marvelous? I can't marry you now. If not me, who are you going to marry? No one. Have you thought hard about your decision? What will Max say once he finds out? I don't know. I just don't know. Now you will have 2 children by Max. You will never have the freedom that you crave. You are not rich and you can't fight a man like that, he said matter-of-factly. I promise you that I will put a stipulation in our agreement that if you marry me, you will have all the money you desire to make you independent of me and anyone, and if you discover that you do not want to be married to me, you are free to go, and I will pay for everything. How can I turn down that offer? But my father once said, when something is too good to be true, it probably is. As usual, I ignored his words, and thought I had done the best for myself with what I had to deal with at this time. I had forgotten that I was never good with contracts. I hesitated. Then, like a waterfall spilling its contents over a cliff, I said, I'll marry you. Charles lightly kissed my forehead. I liked that he did not push himself on me. I liked that he was a gentleman, and I liked that he had patience. He held my hand, and we sat together looking out into the sunset. Our gazes locked, and he gave a delicate smile, concealing a predatory expression of satisfaction that I had seen before on Max's face. My wedding day was approaching. Saturday was the big day. This would be a life-altering occasion. I felt it when my father said that I had been adopted. I felt it when I met Max. I felt it when I found out I was pregnant. And I felt it when I first knew that Max had moved on, and I would never have him again. I tried calling and texting Max, but I received no answers. After our vows were said, then Max would deliver my son to me, and I would tell Max that he would have another child. Informing Charles that first didn't want a large wedding had gone well. Because his friends knew his wife for a long time, they were none too happy with me marrying him. The decision to have a small wedding and invite a few family members proved easy on me and a delight. I was too nervous for a large celebration. It was Friday. Crystal finally made it to Charles's island home. I was in my room sulking about Max not bringing Maxim. He'd conveniently dropped out of sight. He sent word by Josh that it might traumatize Maxim. In Max's words, my son is too young to see his mother marry any man other than his father. It will confuse him. I strolled down the winding stairs and heard voices in the library. The shouting was coming from Charles. Since I had never experienced that side of him, I thought it best that I didn't intrude. When the door opened, I slipped behind it. It was the doctor, whom I had met earlier and had examined me, and who had said how remarkably I looked like Charles's wife. You need to tell her, Charles. I had no idea who the her was that he was referring to. I have no intention of doing that, he said, holding a brandy snifter in his hand and taking a large gulp. Someone should say something. Maybe I will. If you value your practice and clients, then you will not interfere in my affairs. The doctor walked out of the room, with Charles looking on. Let me see you out. I have no problem seeing myself out. He paused, looking back. Just remember what I said, Charles. The doctor walked slowly out, heading for the nearest door to exit the mansion. Charles closed the double doors to the library. I hesitated with my fist to the door. I decided to knock, and Charles answered, "Come in." "I overheard the doctor talking to you," I said, being secretive, as if I knew what the conversation was about. Charles raised an eyebrow and took another drink, his face turning sullen. I added, "I didn't hear what he said, only that you need to tell her." I saw a look of relief wash over him and relax his face. His brow smoothed, and no longer did I see the lines break near his eyes. A wide smile crossed his mouth, and his impeccable white teeth made him appear more handsome. Charles stood and faced me. He placed his arms around my shoulder, and all felt well. I was no longer worried and unhappy. He held me to him. I looked in his eyes, and I saw not erotic desire but a longing for something lost, the loss of his first love. And if I read it in his eyes, he certainly read it in mine. Could Charles and First move past everything, especially Max and his wife, and learn to love each other? That would be the million-dollar question. He held me tight and gave me a soft kiss on my lips, which made me feel that it would not be long before I surrendered myself to him. My need for Mr. Black had waned. I had not felt his arms in months, and I no longer dreamed of him entering and disappearing into my body. Today was the day I would become Mrs. St. John. I had selected an eggshell white, off-the-shoulder satin Vera Wang gown. I didn't want a traditional veil and a church wedding. After all, I was pregnant with another man's child. We were to have a garden wedding near the beach. I had breakfast early in my room. Crystal was there with her happy self, to be my maid of honor. It was good to see her smile again. I didn't have anyone but Crystal now. My father at first refused to give me away when I told him of the new pregnancy. I knew it was because he didn't approve of Charles and of not disclosing my pregnancy to Max, though my father gave no explanation. That's the way he was. He told you once not to do something, and when questioned he always said, "Because I know best. I'm older than you. If you don't listen, you'll learn. You'll learn." Max hadn't taken it well when I finally contacted him the day before the wedding. He said that he knew of the first Mrs. St. John, and that the only reason Charles was marrying me was because First resembled his first wife. I guess that was never a reason to marry anyone, but coming from Max it sounds so perverse. I looked out over the estate from my bedroom window and saw Charles riding his gray gelding on the beach. He came to the front door, and his groom took the horse. Charles appeared to be so calm. I admired him for that. Looking at the clock, I saw that it was almost time for me to dress for our wedding. I shook violently, as if something was very wrong. I wondered if I would see Max or Jonas, since they were not invited. A knock came at the door. "It's time, Ms. Bishop," the housekeeper shouted nervously. "Everything is prepared, and you will be happy with the cake and the food. You need to take your shower. Someone will be in to do your hair, and then Crystal and I will help you dress." When I exited the shower and wrapped a robe around my body, I walked into the living area to see a somber Crystal fidgeting with her hair, her left leg moving at the speed of light. "What is it this time?" "Jonas and Josh are both coming to the wedding," Crystal said, in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear her. "Why would you invite Jonas? I told you to invite people in your family." I threw a pillow at her in anger. "I had to invite Joshua. You know that, Crystal. He's my best friend, and I need him for moral support. I'm dating both of them. I couldn't desert Jonas after all he has been through." My eyes rolled, my head swung back, and I let out a loud sigh. "Didn't I tell you not to have them both hanging on?" I told you to do something, anything, and this is what you did?" Crystal mumbled something and walked into the closet to bring out my dress and shoes. "I came to you because I thought you could tell me something, seeing that you have been dating 2 men, and not just any men, but rich men," Crystal said, sitting on the bed, hunched over and looking at the floor. I crossed the room and put my hand on her shoulder. "I understand how you feel, but when I decided that I was going to marry Charles, Feist let Max know and first didn't waver. I didn't want Max to think that I might marry him. And besides, I had another reason for marrying Charles. But after thinking about what I was doing and had done, it didn't make sense anymore. I was marrying Charles to give me leverage with Max. I knew that I was using Charles, but if what Max said was true, he was using me as well. We were both getting what we wanted. After all, we are adults, as an arrogant, handsome, sexy billionaire once said. You have to make up your mind and live with your decisions, I said, trying to convince Crystal. I hope I can live with mine, I silently confessed. Is that what you're doing, Alex? I glanced at Crystal. Living with your decision, she said, reading my expression. Yes. That's what you do when you are an adult. Live with your decisions and try not to hurt and get hurt. Nothing is guaranteed in life. When our eyes met, the stylist knocked and entered with the maid following. The maid had a smile on her face, and her eyes were bright. She was a young woman who appeared to love the sound of a wedding. Her eyes were full of Prince Charming and live happily ever after. It's your wedding day, Ms. Bishop. Soon you will be Mrs. St. John. She walked around the cluttered room, chatting and picking up shoes, clothes, and coffee cups. After the stylist completed my hairstyle with a bun and curls framing my face, she worked on Crystal. I did my own makeup, which was not much. A little eyeshadow here, a little lip gloss there, and a little blush, and I was done. With frayed nerves and shaky legs, I stepped into my dress. Crystal took more time with her makeup. She had been practicing for somebody's wedding since she was a little girl. Her false eyelashes brought out the beauty in her large eyes. She was a pretty girl and didn't know how to be dishonest. That was why she confessed about Jonas and Joshua. Nevertheless, she wanted both and probably hoped I could help her keep them both. It was not meant to be because they were 2 different men, and they liked her very much, which was not good. I knew how much Josh had wanted her because he would call her when he was in Hong Kong. It had been very expensive to talk once a day, but he managed. No doubt he spent his bonus money to keep in contact with her, even after he tried to break it off. I think he heard the rumors about her and Jonas, and didn't want to look stupid in my eyes. He liked her and wanted to be more to her, but she was caught up with the bad boy, and she couldn't shake that feeling. And neither could I. I saw a change in Jonas whenever he was with Crystal. He was calm and pensive. He appeared to think before he did anything. He thoughtfully sent flowers and took her to dinner and brought her roses, something Mr. Black never did. It's time to go, Crystal said, looking at the clock. So soon. What are you going to do? Stay in here and have everyone come to the room. Remember, you have to live with your decisions, she said, eyeing me with a smirk. Crystal knew the advice I dispensed was a load of shit. We both knew that I couldn't make up my mind, and that Max had made it up for me when he texted me that he would marry soon. Walking in a daze and missing the only man I had loved, I stumbled with every step down the stairs, but managed to make it through the garden doors. Charles had arranged to have beautiful flowers flown in from the nearby islands. Every color was represented. Flowers adorned the walkway and the centerpiece on each of the 100 tables, which were covered with fine white linen under white tents. My father took my arm. He stated that he couldn't desert me. Gazing at me, he said, "You are beautiful." I heard a traditional wedding ballad and saw my mother on the front row crying, and standing on the stage of the gazebo was Charles in his black tux with a boutonniere in his buttonhole. I couldn't help thinking, let's get this over with. It was a slow walk to meet the man I would be with for the rest of my life. It was a slow walk to be with a man I didn't love. It was a slow walk to make promises I couldn't keep. Blinded by how handsome Charles was standing in his black tux, first imagined that he was Mr. Black. How I missed that gorgeous, domineering, jealous man. Standing alongside of Charles was his best man, the doctor who had said, "Tell her." He knew Charles's secret. I didn't know they were close friends. My father in his black suit, a concerned look on his face, stepped aside and released my hand to Charles. There was a somber look on my father's face, the kind of look that made my hair rise on my neck. Maybe he knew something too. Facing the minister, he began the ceremony. As I looked into the minister's eyes, they changed, and his voice became louder and his words began to speed up. A sudden roar came from the guests, and then the noise died down. I thought it was a squirrel that had scampered across the lawn, or a seabird taking a shot at the fancy hats the women were wearing. The minister continued and said, "If anyone should say why these two should not be married, let them speak." I know why. What? I turned to see Max bounding from the arms of security guards, and Jonas standing ready to assist his brother. "Let him speak," Jonas said. Jonas had grown a slight beard and cut his hair in a buzz cut. I hardly recognized him. Max stood on the carpet midway to the gazebo. The guards came behind him and grabbed both arms. Charles's eyes narrowed at me. "I want to hear what he has to say, and then we will get on with the wedding," I said, trying to hold back my excitement of seeing Max break through a throng of security guards to stop my wedding. My eyes held Max's, and he stood in front of me and Charles. I saw tears pool in his green eyes when he stated, "I can't live without you. I need you. We need you to make our family whole again. Don't do this, Alex." Those words were touching, but are you finished so I can get on with my wedding? Charles said, perturbed. His steely eyes met the soft warmth of Max's tear-drenched face. Max's face hardened at the sound of Charles's arrogant words. His tears dried with a brush of the back of his sleeve. "No, I haven't begun. If you don't want the world to hear this, then you had better postpone this ceremony, and you and Alex meet me in the library so we can talk. That is, without your bodyguards." I gazed at Charles with puzzlement. His eyes darted away from mine, and he waved for the microphone. There will be a brief pause in the wedding ceremony for me to address the intruder who has chosen this time to disrupt my wedding. Please have some champagne and food while you wait. Charles gave a broad smile as if he was in charge of everything, and that I should not worry. The guests mumbled to one another, and then with smiles they rose and were directed by men dressed in black suits with white shirts and white gloves to a tent for food and drinks. I wasn't worried. I wanted to see my Mr. Black, even if it was just for a moment. Crystal trailed behind me and cast a glance at Josh, who sat to the left, and Jonas, who sat on the right facing the gazebo. Then Josh and Jonas stared seriously at each other. I hoped they resolved their problems, because mine were immediate and complicated. Heading to the library, I stopped and turned. "Crystal, you can't come in here. This is between Max, Charles, and myself." She dropped the train of my gown and showed me her crossed finger. She was always wishing me good luck, and I gave her one back because she would need it with Jonas. Josh, however, went with the flow. He was easy to like, he was easy to love, and he would be easy to say goodbye to if she chose that route. I entered the library, where a nervous Max paced up and down the oriental rug, holding a cigar in his hand. He stopped in his tracks, catching a glimpse of our faces, and stated, "Charles, first took this opportunity to enjoy one of your Cuban cigars." He set it on a holder, and then he shoved his hands in his pockets. Maybe that was to conceal the shaking of his hands, but his voice showed no loss of control, even as he was out of his element and on Charles's turf. However, I knew Max. His body language suggested that it was a matter of life or death for him. "What is it, Max? Haven't you done enough damage to me?" "It's not what you think, sweetheart." "Don't refer to her as your sweetheart," Charles said, lowering his voice. He continued, "She is soon to be my wife. Do you understand?" "That is a matter of opinion," Max said, reaching for his cigar and taking a pull on it, turning his head to his right and blowing out the smoke. "Can you both stop this?" I said, standing between them. "Max, tell me what is so urgent that you couldn't say it in front of our guests." Max's eyes softened, and his face appeared sad. He just stared into my eyes for a long minute. "Well, get on with it, man," Charles interrupted. Max's face and voice reacted to Charles. "How do I say this delicately?" He took another pull on the cigar, as Charles and First waited. "Use your usual bull in the china shop approach," I interrupted. "We are all adults." "You are the daughter of St. John's late wife," he blurted out. I wanted to faint. I wanted to cry, but most of all, I wanted to die. I didn't want to hear this from Max. What I had overheard at the door of the library was about me. "You have to tell her, Charles," the doctor had said to Charles in the library. I switched my attention to Charles. "Is this true? Why didn't you tell me, Charles?" I gazed at him with concentrated loathing. "Are you my father?" "You're not my daughter. I didn't need to tell you, because I'm not your father. I deserve to know who my mother was. You could have said something." "I wanted to, Alex. But I needed you, and I thought that you would reject me. I have nothing to say except that I'm sorry." I looked at Charles. Exhaustion overwhelmed me. What happened? Why did she put me up for adoption? She had gotten pregnant in her last year of high school by a football jock. I was off to college, and we were to be married after I had graduated and received my inheritance. I didn't find out about you until we were married. We tried to have a child of our own, but she was unable to conceive. We tried to find you, and when we did, you were a teenager, so we paid for your living expenses and college, making sure you wanted for nothing. When your mother died, I lost track of you, and then you showed up at my hotel looking for a job. It was remarkable how much you looked like my wife, your mother, and I began to investigate, and that's when I discovered that you and Maximilian were lovers, and you were Anna's daughter. It was innocent at first, but then it was amazing how much you and she were alike. I began to relive my life again, through you. I pulled away. Remembering how I cared for this man, I walked back to him. I passed my hand along his jaw. He held it and brought my hand to his mouth, and then, turning the palm to his lips, he lowered his head and kissed it. I turned to face Max, knowing that I had made a big mistake, and hoping he would forgive me. "Don't leave me, Alex. I need you," Charles cried out as First ran to Max and buried my head into his chest. I have 3 people who need me more. You have had your life and love. I need to have my love and my memories too. I turned away, walking with my head lowered, clutching Max's hand. He led me through the doors of Charles's mansion, where he had a limo waiting in front. We were silent, and I would not release his hand. I needed the security of Max. Charles stood at his front door, holding back his tears, and said, "If Max is foolish enough to let you get away, I'll be waiting." We slipped into the limo with Max still holding my hand tight. Leaning close, I lay my head against his chest, glancing up at him in silence. My thoughts could be read in my eyes. What a beautiful, sexy man I have. He must be a saint to put up with a spoiled brat like me. It had been a long, exhausting day and night. When I woke, Max was carrying me from his private jet to his limo. It was a blur. All I remembered was waking to the sound of rain. I peeped out of the panoramic windows, which were devoid of curtains, and saw tall pine trees. Through the trees, sunlight stole into the bedroom, and I knew we were in Montana. "Hi there, sleepyhead. How long are you going to lie there?" Max said, leaning against the doorframe from the sitting area to his bedroom. "I have a camping trip planned." I smiled and said, "I hope it's not today and there are no bugs. You know how I hate bugs." "I can't promise you that there will be no bugs. There will be one, and that's me. And no, it's not today." He sat on the edge of the bed and crawled into it. "I love you, Alex. When can we marry and make it legal? Because what I plan to do to you in bed isn't legal in some states." He gave a wink. The glint in Max's eyes made me hot. My hands reached under his pajama top and trailed down his chest. "You have been working out, I see." My head lowered to his chest, and I kissed each muscle. Then my lips eased around his nipple, and I bit one hard. He reached for my head and gently gathered a handful of hair, pulling it back and raising my face to his. "You have been holding out on me," he said, with his dimples carving vertical lines into each side of his jaw. "I think we should enter into another contract. You have skills you have been holding back," he said, showing a slanted smile. My Mr. Black had finally become my Prince Charming, who slayed the dragons and rescued me and took me to his castle. "Whenever and wherever you want, I'm open to anything." "Anything," he said with a wicked grin. "Well, it's been some time, and I need to try you out first. You're like one of my sports cars, sleek and beautiful but a little fragile. I need to know how you handle around the curves." He placed his hands on my hips, caressing them and causing my skin to tingle. His hands moving slowly, making love to my clit, he inserted his finger into my vagina. His sinful jade eyes followed my nipples as they rose when he placed 2 fingers in me, causing arousal of the basest kind, where I would let him tie me up and spank me, and I would satisfy him with whatever he desired all night until he had sated his needs. He nipped at my neck, his mouth and tongue tickling my underarms. His lips found mine, and my mouth opened wide, waiting for his tongue to find its way and then devouring it. "I need a closer inspection," he said, raising his head. His mouth sucked my nipples until they peaked with wanton desire, then he moved his lips over my stomach. Stopping him with my finger placed in front of his lips, I looked down on him. "I have to tell you something first. I hope you haven't become celibate, because I can't wait to feel the inside of you and taste your sweet pussy." I missed his not-so-delicate way of expressing his love for me. I'm pregnant." His eyes widened and he began to laugh. "When were you going to tell me?" Soon, I said, lowering my eyes. His brow narrowed and furrowed. You know you have been a bad girl, and if you weren't with child, I would place you over my knee and use these large hands to paddle your beautiful ass. He raised his hands, placed them on my stomach, and caressed it lovingly. He didn't ask whose child, somehow he knew. But most of all, he knew that I could never be unfaithful to him, and he had never been to me. Our bond was that deep. I need you so bad. I want to have your dick inside me. I don't think I should, he said, excited that I was making the advances. You know I'm not that kind of man. What kind are you? The kind that will not take advantage of a damsel in distress, but you look like a beautiful innocent flower. He bit my nipple. And I intend to enjoy the beauty of your petals before I pluck them. It's safe. I pulled him to me and placed his hands between my legs. Now do what you do best, Mr. Black. His hands moved around in a circle, with his fingers teasing my butt until it stood hard. It's ripe for the taking, he announced. He eased between my legs, and his tongue brushed up and down until his mouth covered my butt. He licked me slowly, then quickly. Then he nibbled it softly and began to suck it until I screamed, I'm coming. When I uttered those words, he reached for my breasts and fingered each nipple, and then like a vice his fingers pinched them until I became so aroused that I had my second orgasm. I fell back against the pillow, breathing hard and shouting, Max, Max, I want more. He stood, untied the string to his pajama bottoms and let them drop. Stepping out of them, he faced me with his dick hard and erect. He inched onto the bed and straddled me. As he looked down, my body ached from the absence of him inside me. He lived inside of my body as I lived for his touch. His greedy mouth and hands moved quietly and patiently until his mouth found my mound. My legs parted, waiting for him to shove his hard shaft into my greedy vagina. Every so often he glanced up, focusing on my belly, which carried his child, but he found himself hesitating. I knew that he didn't want to hurt me, but we needed each other like fish need the oceans, and the oceans need water. You won't hurt me. I anticipated his thoughts. I rose and pushed him backward, and hungrily forced his penis into my mouth. His pulse beat fast, and the ridges of my lips felt the motion. I placed my hand around his penis, and pulled his erection from my mouth, and slid it around my lips, and without any hands, my mouth grasping to hold on it. I worked my mouth up and down, and used my hands to caress his hard thighs. Breathless, he said, Oh, you do have skills. Sucking his shaft, I held onto his hard buttocks, and helped him lean it into my mouth. The upward motion of his body excited me, and I began moving with him. Up and down he thrust his hard shaft forward, and I took all of it. It was a feeling I hadn't had in some time. It was wonderful, giving and controlling. The feeling was long forgotten, but once it occurs, it's like riding a bike, you never forget how. What are you doing to me? I can't come now. Don't make me come, Alex. I want to savor all of this. I reached around and caressed his hard ass, pressing my nails into each cheek and dragging them down until skin broke. I felt cum ease out of his body, and my jaws tightened around his dick. He let out a hard groan. I'm coming, Alex. But I'm not satisfied, and I know that you're not. He faced me, and with his cum easing down my mouth, he wiped it away with the sheet and he kissed me. As I looked into his eyes, he inserted his penis into my vagina. His swollen dick felt as if it rose into my chest. With a slow rhythm, he thrust deeper. I tightened my legs around his waist and rode his body, sinking my mound above his and grinding on it until I felt where his dick began and ended. Exhausted, he fell into my arms, reaching for my swollen breasts, and softly his tongue massaged my tips, making them large. He glanced at me. I better enjoy them now, because soon I will have to share them. I don't like to share the things I love with anyone, but I will make an exception this time, he stated with a gleam in his eyes. I could see my body fading into the dark hue of his iris. He cupped my breasts with his hands and lowered his mouth to my tits and sucked them ever so carefully. My vagina heated to its boiling point, and I felt the warmth of fluid release as I saw Max's penis rise and pulsate. And Max dissolved into a deep sleep, with his head lying in the middle of my breasts. Alex woke the next morning expecting Max to have disappeared, but he was lying close behind her, nuzzling her body. His arms draped over her stomach, and his nose lay in her hair. In his sleep, his head moved to her ear as he placed a small kiss on her neck, and his hand caressed her stomach. She placed her hand over his, and he felt the warmth of it and opened his eyes. Compelled by his love and the desires he harbored for Alex, he touched her face, her hair, her breasts, and her stomach. She turned, facing him, and Max's finger made a circular motion around her lips, as if his finger was a brush and he would paint a picture. Each touch he made with his fingertips on the ridges of her plump lips caused a rise in his manhood. A sound from her smartphone indicated that she had an email. Go ahead, Alex. Read your emails. I need to take a shower, and then we can resume our honeymoon. He sat with his back to Alex, his body naked and his legs dangling on the floor. Alex smiled, trailing kisses across Max's back. We aren't married yet. Max stepped from under the covers. His body overexcited, and his permanent erection still prominent, he stood facing her. You know you need to do something with that, she said, pointing to his erection. Max headed back to the bed. No. Go. Alex waved him on. The commercials said that if you have an erection for over 4 hours, then you need to see a doctor. They both laughed, and Max entered the shower. Alex opened the text. It was a message from Charles. She sighed. What now? Alex. I know you are happy. I don't know how to make up for what I put you through with my selfish behavior. Please forgive me. There was another text shortly after, and Max exited the shower with his hair wet and a white towel hooked around his waist. He saw the pain on Alex's face. What's wrong? Nothing. What could be wrong? I have never been this happy, she said, holding her now prominent belly with one hand and the phone in the other. She didn't want to hide anything from Max. There are a few texts from Charles, and I'm going to read them. She patted the indent where his body had lain. Max sat on the side of her and gazed at the screen. Alex. I have our mother's jewelry, and I want you to have them for our daughter. There is also her will. She left everything to you. They each glared at the other, and Alex blurted out, A will? Max shouted, No. Charles did that on purpose. The farther away Charles appeared to be in Alex's life, the closer he inched.